So I recently learned a thing in Heptabase, and that is how powerful the humble little text field is. And its ability to hold images absolutely blew my mind when I realized what I could do with that. And it's changing the way that I'm using Heptabase, particularly in the way I can see information and what I can bring in there. So let's go and have a look at that, and then I'll tell you a story about how it all happened. So it began when I was on the Heptabase Discord server, and a user there called Panta has been showing people how they use this ability of Heptabase to take images in the text field to bring text objects onto the whiteboards. What you're looking at here is a calendar and even a daily calendar that was built by Panta, and it has individual journal entries here lining up with this piece here, which is just a graphical element, and the same on the right hand side. This piece that looks like a diary entry is actually being used to organize the day, but it's allowing the cards just to sit on a whiteboard in a way that's more powerful than just using something like sections or labels. And you'll begin to see why this has actually blown my mind as I've started to use this and started to explore what this might mean as I start to make graphics do things. You might be able to see here, if you look carefully, that the text field is also slightly able to be semi-transparent, which means you can drag it on top of other graphical elements, which is really useful. Cards don't do the same, but the text field itself can. However, we can start to combine all of these elements together, and I'll show you where this started to take my brain. And firstly, it was actually, I had in mind that I wanted to create a timeline, and so what I did was looked at elements that might help me to do that. So what I'm going to do is show you how both of these things work. This is an image that's been brought into a text field, and this is another one here that might already be a pre-made element for a timeline. So I might just start with this one here, because in fact that's similar to what Panta had. How did I get here? So to do this, I'm actually just going to delete this and recreate it for you. So I'm going to go right click, text. So I'm looking to create a text element or a text field. You'll see it pops up a tiny little box. If I zoom right in there, you'll see it's asking me to type or put something in. If I put the /, one of the options I get is image. And so then it comes up with paste a link or upload an image. So I'm going to upload the most powerful images I've found are SVG files, which come from the web or are designed to work in a browser environment, or PNG because they have a transparent background. If your files aren't in those formats, you can always find online sites that will take JPEG to PNG, or lots of apps that you can get both on a phone, on a tablet, on a desktop can do that. So I'm going to upload an image, and I'm going to bring in something that looks like what we're looking at. So this, I've brought in this title, and you'll see that it's only just the very top of it, because what Panta did was actually just use the cards themselves to create the boxes of the calendar. I could have brought in a graphic that actually had on it the squares to drag stuff into. Now, if I want to resize this, you'll notice that as I hover towards the side, you can see that my cursor has the arrows on it, so I can grab the side of this and drag. Now, if I drag, you'll see a little white line comes up on either side here, a little handle. If I grab that, sometimes it feels like nothing's happening, because it's actually looking for this, it's looking for the side of here. And if I keep dragging from one side to the other, it's basically allowing that box to get bigger with the content scaling inside it. Whereas what I can do is, now I've grabbed one of those side handles, you'll see that it's actually shrinking the graphic inside that field. For a lot of what I'm doing, I've found that I've just wanted to grab the side of the box. So if I create an object like this, then I could then create just a normal card or a journal entry, which sat underneath it. So if I grab a journal like this, as we can see, the standard size of this, let's actually make these agree with each other so they're kind of about to scale. Of course, with a card, I can also shrink that up so it's bigger or smaller. If I made a few of these, so I'm just going to paste a couple, you can see that that's effectively what Panta did, was just line them up. And again, we've got those tools that if I grab more than one thing, I can go here and I can go tidy up, and then I can align things, which is a really useful tool once we start really getting into this, and they'll just snap into alignment. So that was one of the, I guess, one of the first uses, and that was what Panta was sharing, and it was really cool. And then what I wanted to do was to take that further, and I actually wanted to look at putting a timeline into one of the things I was doing, which was tracking some of the times one of my plays had been performed. Now I could have brought in an element like this, so this is just another PNG that I've already brought in, and then to work with that I can do things like just add other text fields. So I could say things like 2015. Now once I create a text object like that, if I can still use the normal tool, so I can now make this heading 1 kind of size. I might just shrink that up so that element just behaves. And I can drag that to wherever I want that to be as a part of this. I might then, I could also drag a card down. What you'll see is if I carried on in this text field, so this is, let's go, this is an example. And I can then also color that. So now when I drag this down, this is where you'll start to see that something that's quite useful about this is as I drag this over the image, it actually gains a little bit of transparency. Now, you may not be able to see that quite as well because I'm in dark mode, so I'm just going to switch to light mode, and you'll see the same thing, that in light mode, that text box is actually, you can see the other graphic through it, which a card won't let that happen. Now, that's something that I also learned is if I'm working, I'm going to switch back to dark. If I brought in some text and it was black, it's not going to switch with the theme. So I've found that sometimes creating text elements that are grey means that as we go between dark and light, if you watch these, you'll see that that grey is still readable in light mode, and if I go back to dark, obviously stands out here as well. So that's one of the things that we might bring in is an element like this, or we might start bringing in other images. So for example, if I was actually looking at something where I wanted to describe the process for how something was going to be created or built, I'm going to again go add image. So from here I'm going to get upload again, and I'm going to bring in something like a group of people. So here again I've chosen to bring in a group that's grey, just so that you can see what I'm doing. I could have, once I got that in here, I can again scale that. So for example, I may then be adding that to elements like in terms of things that I want to happen in the timeline assemble team. It might be one of my first steps, and so I actually start to put those things together as I'm creating a roadmap for what I'm doing. Now, as I zoom in and out, obviously the element that was created, which is the text, the label on it can't get any bigger than this. As you know, that once you work with sections, they behave where the header scales slightly differently, and that has been something that's been a little bit of a limitation for me with the whiteboards. But again, I could see a way around that by using this text field. If I brought in something like I'm now going to bring in a graphic that is just a year. So for example, here we go, here's one I prepared earlier. If I bring that in and I keep zooming out, as you can see, that doesn't get smaller, and it gets to a point where even though the text in the text field, which would be what you would normally have to play with, is following just the header 1 size, and as you zoom in, if you're really using the infinite canvas, you'll find that that doesn't do a whole lot of changing, but suddenly you've got this element here that you can choose how big that's going to be based on how far away from your information you're going to get. And we'll have a look at that soon as I actually look at the timeline that I built for one of the shows that I was doing. So you can see here that I can just keep adding elements. I can, again, if I actually look at the difference of bringing in a, here's a group that's against a white background, it's white against what is a transparent background, you'll see that that also just feels, it feels brighter and different than, say, the grey one. But I typically just stay in dark mode. If I knew I was going between dark and light, or if I was sharing this with other people who might want to work in light mode, then I'd probably go to these other colors. And of course, you're not limited to black, white, and grey. So I could have any colors I wanted, and then they would stand out against white or black. So that's something I can play with. So let's have a look at the next step in this puzzle. For me, was actually I wanted to create a timeline, but I didn't want to bring in a text element with nodes on it because I didn't know how long it was going to be. But it dawned on me that this whole idea of having the text field can hold, can actually create connections to other things. So what you're seeing here is this here is just a text field, and I've dropped into it the basically an object which is a square. By using alt codes, you can cut and paste them as well. So I'll show you how I do that. But basically, I can create a timeline, and I've chosen to create nodes where I can have things that drop off it, like this. I quite like having an element that is able to be a connector point, but this could just be a blank. And so it means you can actually create you can connect cards, other sections, all sorts of things, because that's one of the basic abilities of Heptabase. So let me show you what this actually ends up looking like, and then I'll show you how I physically do this. So just to jump to how I use this, I wanted to build a timeline that looked like this, where I was tracking each of these is a journal entry which connects to other whiteboards with the dates of some of my plays being performed in other cities and other theatres, and as it's over the life of the play, so this particular play was written in 2013 and has had a number of performances at fringe festivals and schools and theatres both here and overseas. In this case, when I first built this one, I've just used the standard text object, because this one I knew had slightly less performances. However, I knew for the next time I was going to build, it had about 65 performances around the world, and that wasn't going to fit. And so for that one, I would be looking at doing that very trick that I showed you before, which is to bring in an image file, which is actually going to have the years on it, so that I can then, as I zoom away from, go back, as I zoom away from this, or as it even gets bigger, so I'm just going to make this one get a bit bigger. If I click on it, come here, you. There we go. So even as I zoom out, there's actually one I put there earlier, so let me don't need that one. As I zoom out, you can see I can still see this content, even though the text above it is starting to disappear. So this is what I wanted, where in this one, you'll see if I zoom in close, each card is connecting to basically just a text field with a node in it, because they have that ability. So I'm going to jump back to where we were before, and I'll just actually show you how we create those. So to create nodes like this, if I just go text, and in this case, I'm going to actually just, it's Alt on I'm on a Windows machine, so Alt 254 gives me a square. If now I can actually make that bigger. So, or I could have just put a graphical element, but by having just a text element, I figured they'd be lighter. Once I bring them in, I've then got the ability to change the color of those, still just using the standard Heptabase controls. So if I want that to be a different color, I'm literally just using, by selecting it, I can choose any one of these kind of color controls that's in here. Then I tend to drag the edges of the box nice and small, and then if I right click on it, I can now go draw a connection. So I can draw a connection from here to another one of these, and if you've seen my other tutorials, you'll know that I can do things like change this to straight line. I can change it so that there are arrows or not. I can change whether or not it displays as a dotted line or just as a solid line, and also which part of this it connects to. And again, what I was saying before is if I choose two of these and they're not quite lining up, I just go tidy up and then align the centers, and then what I get is a perfectly straight line. And as you can see, I can just keep building nodes and nodes and nodes, which if I go back to here, that's what I did is I create a node, I drag another point, then I connected a card to it, then I just created another node beside it, and I'm just adding incremental pieces to this timeline. And it's a trick that Heptabase didn't seem to suggest it could do, other than what we're doing is starting to combine some of the tools that are in here. And this is, to me, is really amazing, because not only have I got the ability to automatically connect these as I move them around, they behave, they stay connected. If I move the other node along the line, it equally just that stays connected to that line. Now what you're starting to see is I can actually start to mess with that line, because that's part of the function of the what's already built into this draw connect tool. One of the things I can do by choosing the line is if I thought actually I wanted to show something that was less like a timeline and more like a how are we doing some sort of success thing, I can actually click and make that a curved line, and then when I grab the central node on it, so now I can literally show that potentially maybe in 2014 there was an uphill climb for part of this, and we had to work. Now as you see, as we start to grab some of these, I may need to smooth out some of the curves on these, and you'll see that as I drag the center point of those, the other parts of the curve behave in certain ways. And sometimes if you end up with a curve that's just not quite looking right, sometimes I just destroy. That one actually turned out okay, but if I have one that was not behaving, it's really simple just to remove it and then right click, draw connection, and reconnect those bad boys. And in this case, I just need to remake that into dotted line. So what you'll see is it gives that ability to, again, do something which I think is not something that that you might expect was a behavior that you could get from the draw connection, or actually from these little text fields. So I want to move on to where this goes next. So there are all sorts of things you can do, because the graphics you bring in, so I was showing before these basic sort of people, figures attaching to a timeline, but I can bring in much more polished, finished looking graphics. And as you can see here, what I've then done is I've just added an image which had steps like this, which you can find galore on the internet, or somebody else may be making those for you. In this case, it was 4 steps and it was already done. It might be 4 steps on how to do something like plan a wedding, or plan a launch event. Again, what I've done here is I've chosen to add a text field, and the text has a background. If I move it away from here, it just appears against the actual background of the whiteboard. If I drag it over, you can actually see how that's interacting. If I come across here, there's just one that's a single item. Here's the text again, and as I drag that on here, the difference is the one here has actually got a background color. So I chose what is called black, and you can see it now appears as a kind of a grey even against the black of the interface, whereas this one I didn't give it a background color, so it's just truly transparent. And so you can see the difference is that even though the text, actually if we make these the same size, if I made them both heading 1 kind of size, you would see that this one is still slightly stronger because it's got that feel popping it out. Depends if you want a clean look with no edges, or whether it's just about making sure that the size of what you were doing matches the size of the graphic that you're working with, and all of those things can be, if I just make the graphic bigger, you can see that I can manipulate those things together. So we've got this ability with adding text elements that suddenly makes this a really amazingly graphical environment that that is really, really flexible. And it depends on how you start to imagine your data as to what you start to do with it. So for example, if I jump over here, this is just a couple of items doing the same thing. If I was looking at a timeline, here's a completely graphical version of that. So you're starting to get into infographics where all I've done is I've added elements that I grabbed that wrong, where I've added elements that are like a text field with an image in it. We've got, markers. We're actually becoming a three-dimensional thing. I could have an entire another series of cards out here with part of that journey. It does mean that Heptabase can become this tool that actually allows you to present information, as well as, even if you're just a really graphical person and you want to think and see what you're making this way, it starts to become a bit more of a single place to do a huge amount of work, as opposed to having to leave the program because it didn't have graphical capabilities. That said, it doesn't have to be one tool that can do absolutely everything, because I still use a suite of tools in what I do, and it's about choosing the right tool. For example, at the moment, Heptabase, I can't draw directly into it, but I do a lot of thinking with a tablet and a stylus, and I can import those things into here now as drawings as a part of seeing an overall plan for something that I'm doing. But I don't have to get hung up on that. But this particular feature, as I said, it blew my mind as to what it means I can now do. And if we take another step, it's like what it could do is you could import backgrounds into a given whiteboard that operate so that you can automatically drag things to them. It's a little bit like the way people work with bullet journals, or if you're thinking in a business form, you could have a particular series of, it's almost like visual, Kanban, which I know we can do in the tag editor, but when I'm using this visual note-taking tool, I'm not quite ready for that part yet, and I want to stay in this visual environment. So you can actually create these whatever backgrounds, whatever objects, whatever things make your whiteboards make sense, and effectively this ability to have super titles, and then you're just dragging elements or adding other images on top of that. It's not to take place of something like a stylus where you're trying to draw, because as I said, you don't need to try to force that issue, but actually it makes Heptabase even more powerful, because as a visual note-taking system, you're really starting to take advantage of that very thing, which is, as I scroll back from here, you're seeing this infinite canvas at work. You may have noticed that the way I moved around the canvas was that I actually created just a series of cards, and those cards themselves, I just had a reference to another card, and by using the @mention function, it means when I clicked on that, it basically just jumped to the next one. So again, it kind of made it like a presentation tool, which is useful if I'm trying to share this with somebody and I'm just wanting to jump around, particularly this kind of mode where I'm filming at the same time as actually clicking and doing and drawing, it makes it easier for your brain just to track along, and you've already decided how you're going to get around the information, and so it's helping jump around, even though it may be organized in such a way like here where I know I needed to zoom in and zoom out. For a lot of people, they're going to be using this as a planning or research tool, so it's just going to be you using it for yourself. But the ability to do these sorts of things where suddenly I can be introducing these graphical super tags, and kind of, well, super tags may be the wrong word because I've heard that in discussions in the Discord server, but these titles, these graphical titles, are something that's going to be a big game changer for me. So if I look at one of my go back to my own information where I have where I've started to extract huge amounts of information from notebooks that I've got, I end up with whiteboards that have 100 or so cards that have effectively been sorted onto them, and then each of those I can sort into other smaller whiteboards that are useful. But on the main one, I still want to be able to get back here and go, okay, what was I thinking? And initially I was using images like this inside a section to help me find my way around and to really quickly jump to with it. While I was really zoomed out, I knew this was the section about climate change, even as I was zooming further than the sections were titles were giving me, because they do get cut off. But by using by importing title cards like this, effectively these can get bigger, and again I'll just drag this a little bit, and as I zoom out and out, you can still see that I could have all sorts of graphical things organizing this, where I actually had that just sitting in the background, or sitting a single banner across the top, which divided this up so that it made sense to being able to scan it or skim it for information, which again I think is a really useful way. So if we go right back to where we started, a big thank you to Panta for sharing what you had done with the journals, because that totally unlocked something in my brain going, oh my goodness, if we could do that, then maybe we could also try this. And this is how we ended up getting to where we got to. So it really did, it really has changed what I do, and it has opened up all sorts of possibilities. And again, I think there are more things that are yet to be discovered as I've started tutoring. Even as I have been preparing today's tutorial, I discovered a couple of things like, oh, that's how I might use that. So I encourage you to have a really good go at seeing what happens. I haven't yet found that it's made Heptabase too clunky or overdriving it. So it seems to be able to handle these text fields, and the images are all part of the basic architecture, and it's quite robust. So it seems to be behaving. If there are parts of this process you didn't quite get, don't forget I've got the crash course in my other tutorials on my YouTube channel, which might help you go back to some of the basics that I didn't touch on today, or leave me a comment and I'll see if I can answer some of the questions. I've also just recently been invited to be an affiliate with Heptabase, which I'm really excited about, that the team have had faith in me to do that. So I will also put a link on here if you aren't already a user of Heptabase. There is a link there, which I'd appreciate you clicking, and also please subscribe and tell others that this channel is worth watching for some information on Heptabase.